Well, I finally did it. I finally read The Passenger, the book to which I had long looked forward. The book which I had hoped would be the glorious swan song of Cormac McCarthy, my favorite writer. And you know what? It was. It really did live up to my expectations, if not exceeded them. The Passenger was not only everything I wanted it to be, it's everything I want literature to be. It is a stunningly written work with understandable characters who are among the best rendered of any McCarthy has ever penned. Enough themes, ideas, and concepts to keep you cogitating for years, and an aching sense of emotion so poignant that it cuts like a blade. This is one of the most profoundly sad books I think I have ever read, but also one of the greatest, I think. It is, I believe, the capstone of McCarthy's career as a writer, and a work which bears within it traces of many, if not all, of his previous books. Structurally, it resembles Suttree, although I liked it infinitely more than that book because the characters aren't deadbeat dickheads. And there's actual weight to the story as well. There's a sly mention in the narration of the redness of the evening, which I refuse to believe is not a reference to Blood Meridian. In short, The Passenger is a culmination, and a marvelous culmination at that. And so I would like now to dissect and explore this most wondrous work as best I can, for there is such a wealth of material to plumb. The story of The Passenger may seem like something of a bait and switch. Bobby Western is the brilliant son of a member of the Manhattan Project, a man who helped create the atomic bomb, now one of the prime threats to humanity. Bobby's own brilliance is surpassed, however, by that of his deceased sister, Alice slash Alicia, a math prodigy who took her own life, an event Bobby forever lives in the shadow of. Bobby was tragically and hopelessly in love with his own sister, a return to the motif of incest which McCarthy had used in his sophomore novel, Outer Dark, although here used in a much more positive light. When the book opens, Bobby is working as a salvage diver in New Orleans, diving to locate a downed plane. It would appear, however, that one passenger from the plane is missing, having potentially somehow escaped. This brings agents from an unspecified agency calling, who ransack Bobby's living quarters and eventually freeze all of his assets. Now caught within a conspiracy which he can't even comprehend, Bobby must flee for his freedom or perhaps his very life. And in between all this, there are musings on a variety of subjects, from Bobby and Alicia's father's atomic legacy to the nature of consciousness and being, to the relationship between mathematics and the universe, to the JFK assassination, and a lot else. The Passenger, I think, can be seen as sort of a net in which McCarthy tries to roll all the things that he wants to talk about. In some of the more negative reviews of the book, I've seen people say that they felt cheated because the setup of the conspiracy never really comes to anything and the plot just kind of dissolves. To that, I say, who cares? McCarthy doesn't write conventional thrillers. Even No Country for Old Men went out of its way to subvert expectations of how a story of its type should pan out. The Passenger is no different. We assume that there will eventually be an unraveling of the central mystery because that's what we see in movies and stuff. But McCarthy is nothing if not true to life. The JFK assassination, which he discusses at length in the book, happened over a half a century ago, and it still hasn't been sorted out because conspiracies rarely, if ever, get sorted out, and usually not by the people caught in their midst. So I advise any prospective reader to simply abandon all notions of clean resolution because that isn't what this book is really about. And besides, I don't see Thomas Pynchon getting the same flack with like The Crying of Block 49. The Passenger, at the end of the day, is a novel of ideas and character, but not plot. As I said, The Passenger contains elements of many, if not all, of McCarthy's previous books. And one such element is the nature of nomenclature and language. In Outer Dark, there is a conversation regarding names and the necessity of names, that things unnamed cannot be claimed. This recurs in The Passenger as there is discussion about language and the denoting of things. As well, mathematics, another major theme of the novel, can be thought of as the language of the universe. This all ties in with the Kekule problem, a nonfiction piece that McCarthy wrote a few years ago about the origins of language and the relationship between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And speaking of consciousness, Alicia, Bobby's genius sister, is also a schizophrenic. She is routinely visited by bizarrely comical apparitions, which she refers to as the horts, as in cohorts. The most prominent among them being a deformed dwarf figure called the thalidomide kid. Thalidomide being that drug in the 50s that was given to women to ameliorate morning sickness, which caused horrendous birth defects. Just an aside. These are at first taken to be products of a diseased unconscious. However, due to a later development in the book, that may not be the true case. The unconscious is older than language, and it communicates differently through dreams and visions and such. This is why so many of McCarthy's books feature extended dream sequences, and why he's one of the few authors able to pull this off well, because he understands something about the nature of dreams and what they mean. But what is the unconscious? This is a question at the heart of The Passenger. Is it merely an older, more abstract version of our psyches, or is it something more? Is it perhaps a window onto something greater, something higher? Towards the end of the book, Bobby is himself visited by the thalidomide kid, revealing that he exists independently of Alicia's mind. This is very important, as it is the only time in McCarthy's oeuvre that he has indulged in explicit, inarguable supernaturalism. While many of McCarthy's books contain an element of the paranormal, it's always ambiguous, and there's always an alternative explanation. Maybe Judge Holden is the devil, but then again, maybe he isn't. Maybe the man who Billy Parham converses with in the epilogue to Cities of the Plain is death, but then again, maybe he's just a man. There's always a way out, but not here, not now. What I think McCarthy is putting forward here with Bobby's unexpected visitation from one of his long dead sister's hallucinations is that the unconscious is a link with something far older even than language, and far stranger as well. But it is the purpose of Alicia's hallucinations that I'd like to touch upon as well. The thalidomide kid seems to be bent on distraction, on keeping Alicia's mind from delving too deeply into things. Indeed, one of Alicia's greatest woes, and perhaps the reason why she ultimately kills herself, is because she feels that the universe can never be understood, and that even mathematics and physics lead only to more and more mysteries and not solutions. And this brings us to another interesting topic, the seemingly deleterious nature of consciousness itself. Last year, I read Thomas Ligotti's nonfiction book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. In that book, Ligotti asserts that consciousness is an accident of nature that is actually at odds with nature's intents, because the more a creature is able to consider life, the less worthwhile it becomes. That is, the more you really think about living, the more you realize how bad it really is. Nature intends for organisms to live and reproduce, but an organism that is conscious of itself and its circumstances may very well reject the course upon which it is set, which many people do. Alicia's hallucinations seem to want to take her mind off the issues which plague her, the questions to which she knows answers may very well never be found. They're trying to keep her alive, in other words, to occupy a mind too acute for its own good. But there is also another important point about consciousness that McCarthy raises in The Passenger, in which he has alluded to in past works as well. The necessity of consciousness for anything to matter, or perhaps for anything to be, period. In the final conversation between the judge and the kid in Blood Meridian, the judge asks the kid if all the places to which he has traveled in his life still exist after he leaves them. Did you post witnesses? He asks. As well, in an earlier scene when the Glanton gang kill a man in cold blood, the judge is able to talk the authorities out of recourse by explaining that there were no witnesses to the crime. This all ties in to one of that book's central themes, that things that are not beheld do not matter, and in fact can be said to be no different than not existing at all. In The Passenger, Bobby tells another character that existence hinges upon consciousness, as in a way it creates reality. There is no such thing as information in and of itself, independent of the apparatus necessary to its perception. There were no starry skies prior to the first sentient and ocular being to behold them. Before that, all was blackness and silence. Now, while this may sound a bit solipsistic, can it really be disputed? Things only matter to beings which they can matter to. I would say this may have pantheistic ramifications. You and I are the universe beholding itself, and without us, there is no universe, because without the beholder, there is nothing to behold. The Passenger is a book of endings, which is appropriate considering that it and its companion piece, Stella Maris, will likely be McCarthy's last outings. Things end in The Passenger: relationships, lives, memory, perhaps even the world. At the heart of The Passenger is a tendency towards entropy, a dissolution into nothingness. This is likely why the plot fizzles out like it does, a narrative reflection of the narrative's themes. Bobby and Alicia grow up living in the shadow of their father's creation, the atomic bomb. While I'm far from qualified to speak on the workings of nuclear weapons, I do know that it involves the splitting of an atom, the destruction of reality's smallest component. I think this functions as a perfect metaphor for what the book is all about. In discussing Shakespeare's works, scholars often denote the tragedy plays as works which move from order to disorder. McCarthy has commented as well in interview that tragedy is the oldest and most potent art form, that for some reason we value works of sadness more than works of joy. I think The Passenger reveals that this is so because tragedy is reflective of the true nature of reality, the move from order to disorder. Scientifically speaking, things are in a constant state of decay, again, entropy. One of the speculated ends of the universe itself is that of heat death, a void bereft of all energy and whose particles have all broken apart into nothing. I feel that The Passenger is such an effective work because it condenses the fate of the cosmos into a human life, providing a lens through which to see our world and our own plight in it. And isn't that the highest thing a book can do? The Passenger contains some of McCarthy's finest character work, and as I've said, I think character has often been his weak spot as a writer, but not so in The Passenger. I cared more for Bobby and Alicia Western than I have for any characters in any other McCarthy book, except maybe for Sheriff Bell in No Country for Old Men. He was a really good character. Both Bobby and Alicia have actual arcs, though, from passive to active. Alicia's life ends by her own hand, and while this may seem a dark end, it's one of proactivity. Alicia eventually grows tired of dwelling in an uncaring, if not downright hostile, universe which she cannot reckon. and so chooses to exit the stage. Bobby's arc involves running away from the feds who are after him. Again, this may seem even more ignoble than suicide, but it demonstrates a change in his character. Throughout the majority of the book, he is wholly inert and indecisive. In the end, however, he finally takes charge of his life, or at least of what he can. The word passenger is used in a few different places throughout the book, but in the end, I think it's ultimately referring to how we are all just passengers through life and how important it is to be proactive in your own life, or at least insofar as you can. The Passenger also contains some, I think, highly perceptive critiques of society and where it's going, and ones which I think a lot of people might do well to read. There is discussion of the moral degradation of society through, again, the reduction of terminology, how addicts are no longer addicts but now users, and that sort of thing. As well, there is an interesting conversation about the potential rise of electronic money and how that can and will be used against the citizenry. And, buddy, you better damn well pay attention to that. As well, the main antagonistic force in the novel is the U.S. government, and I think the story does a pretty good job of illustrating a government that has gotten out of hand and now wields too much power over the populace. Once again, I think The Passenger proves itself to be a book concerned with decay, and that extends to the level of the societal. Going into The Passenger, I was hyped. I really wanted to see if McCarthy was going to top Blood Meridian, widely held to be his masterpiece. And I think he did, or at least for me, he did. I really do feel that he outdid himself with this book. Now, I won't say that this is his most perfect book. I think that's still Blood Meridian. But I think this is his most well rounded book, if that makes sense. Like, Blood Meridian is a finely honed work which is zeroed in on a handful of themes, and it gets where it goes with remarkable aplomb. The Passenger is a bit more unwieldy, but I do believe that it exceeds all McCarthy's previous works in terms of ambition as well as the synthesis of all its elements. You know, I rate books based on three categories: character, story, and writing. McCarthy pretty much always knocks it out of the park with the writing, and the stories are also virtually always on point, but he does wobble a bit with the character sometimes, if not most times, but not here. Here, McCarthy succeeds on all three fronts, even if the overall product is a tad more scattershot in its final form. You know, going into The Passenger, I told myself that as eager as I wasn't going to allow myself to be blinded to any faults which the book might have. And I think it does have some faults, but I also think that those faults are negligible when compared with its successes. What quibbles I did have with The Passenger mainly have to do with its setup and the way it introduces characters. It's hardly artful the way McCarthy sets up these conversations just so that he can talk about, well, whatever it is he wants to talk about, although the actual conversations themselves end up being stellar. As well, the book has a habit of just hurling new characters at you without any kind of context, so there were times where I didn't quite know the significance of a certain character or even if they had any. But again, with what the characters say, I think redeems this somewhat clumsy arrangement. So, yeah, The Passenger. I think I can safely say that Blood Meridian is no longer my second favorite book of all time. This is. Now, I know that much of my reading tends toward the past, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is quite possibly the finest book of the 21st century thus far. It is beautiful, heartrending, and extremely moving, immensely thought provoking, and all around just a staggering achievement of literature. I am so happy with this book and how it turned out. I give The Passenger an A plus. And since McCarthy will likely never publish another book after The Passenger and Stella Maris, unless he has some trunk novels, which he's sitting on, unlikely, then I'll say it now. You done good, old man. You done good. So, have you read The Passenger. If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you have not read The Passenger, pick it up, read it. It is, again, the capstone of one of the most illustrious careers in literature in recent memory, and you really can't go wrong reading this book, I don't think, anyway. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, I would really appreciate it, and until next time, peace.